21st century Portslade, home to 20,000 people and a base for numerous shops, offices and restaurants. A wide infrastructure of roads, public services, utility supplies and schools keeps its residents safe, warm and dry. But it wasn't always like this. The question is, where did it all begin? While scientists believe that the universe started with a Big Bang, historians have their own theories to the birth of Portslade. The first crackle of a bang can be traced back to 2000 BC. Remains of a wooden henge were discovered close to Mile Oak Farm. The next phase of development was the Roman period. It is believed that Portslade was a major commercial port for the Romans, and a Roman road is known to have stretched from Portslade to London. But by 400 AD, it all goes very quiet in Portslade. No written records, no archaeological remains, no obvious sign of life. And then, 1066, and boom! The Normans invade and see great potential in Portslade. They love the farmland, the wild deer, and the natural spring water. They like it so much, they build the first stone house in Portslade, Portslade Manor House. And so it begins. Portslade Manor is at the epicentre of the explosion. Around the manor, a small hamlet begins. This hamlet grows into a village with farming, law and order, and social gatherings emanating from the central point of the manor. By the 19th century, the village is a town, boasting its own successful industries and businesses. By the 20th century, the town has developed into the large urban setting that we see today. But it all started in the quiet hills and valleys in 1066. Welcome to the birthplace of Portslade. The year is 1066. King Edward the Confessor of England has died childless, and Earl Harold Godwinson has been hastily crowned the new King Harold. But there are other contenders to the crown. 90 miles across the Channel, William of Normandy is readying his vast army to invade England. He believes the crown belongs to him and is ready to fight King Harold. The Normans envy England's efficient tax system, wealth and organised system of government, a system where only the king and his nobles could make money. By William's side is a Norman noble, William de Warenne, keen to be part of this money-making plan. The Normans land at Pevensey and the Battle of Hastings begins at 9 AM on October 14th. By 5 PM, 14,000 fighting men are reduced to just 4,000. The Normans are victorious and William the Conqueror is crowned King William I of England. He creates William de Warenne as the first Earl of Surrey and gives him vast amounts of land across 13 counties, including the land that you're standing on right now. William de Warenne was now one of the richest people in England and the owner of Portslade. The Normans forged the political and social landscape of England from 1066 to 1154. Part of this change was the construction of residential and religious structures using stone. Portslade Manor was built in 1130 by the son of William de Warenne. Stone houses were expensive to build and therefore were a symbol of wealth and status. When the Lord of Portslade decided to build Portslade Manor House 900 years ago, it would have made a big dent in his medieval wallet, even though it was small by comparison to other Norman buildings, such as the Tower of London, which was built at a similar time. You can see from the ruins that the main material used was flint, a hard stone that came from the local chalk hills. Some of the flints are knapped, which means they are cracked open to expose the shiny black stone. The flints are bonded with lime mortar, which were constructed by skilled Norman craftsmen, using local slave labour for the heavy work. At the corners of the building and on the window frames, you can see the stone is smoother and lighter in colour. This is Caen limestone, which was shipped over at great expense from Normandy. Whilst the general shape of the ruins is an L shape, the original Norman building was rectangular, with a basement at ground level and just one floor, the Great Hall above. A west wing, which was 2 stories high, and with its tall tower still standing today behind you, was added many years later. Timbers were used to complete the building, including a pitched roof. Around the manor, there would have also been several outbuildings built of timber, which served as offices to administer the estate and the workers. The Lord of the Manor's role evolved around his oath of loyalty to his immediate superior, usually the king. He would be expected to fight and provide soldiers and arms from his manor when called upon. This was called a feudal system, which is similar to a class system. Imagine a pyramid. The king is at the top, followed by his nobles, knights, the clergy, the merchants, the tradesmen, and at the bottom were the peasants. A lord of the manor was normally appointed by the king as a thank you for his loyal services. It was common for medieval lords to own several manors, and therefore would not necessarily be in residence in the manor house. Though we tend to refer to the lord of the manor as a he, the lordship could equally be passed to a woman. Portslade's first female lord of the manor was Margaret de Burgh in 1226. Apart from collecting rents and taxes from his tenants, the Lord of Portslade had one other perk. It was custom that all items washed up on the beach between Aldrington and Hove belonged to the Lord of Portslade Manor. In 1653, this included an anchor and cable, 2 pieces of canvas and 6 yards of green woolen cloth. The original house had a basement, which was used as a food and weapons store. Above it was the Great Hall. This was a typical arrangement in early Norman manor houses. Where you're now standing was the entrance to the basement. The floor of the basement was hammered white chalk. At the basement level to your right, on the south wall, you can see 2 loophole windows from the Norman period. Loophole windows have narrow vertical openings on the outer wall, but become much wider on the inside. These loophole windows are now partly buried on the church side, which suggests that the ground is higher there now than it was back in Norman times 900 years ago. The east wall formed part of the original rectangular Norman manor house and measured about 10 metres in length. Behind you is a red brick arch-shaped structure. This was built around 500 years ago and was a window to allow light into the basement. Look at how close the church is to the manor house. It is probable that the Lord of Portslade Manor built or donated the land for St Nicholas's church at the same time he constructed the manor house. Religion played an important part of medieval life, and by building his house next to the church, the Lord of the Manor would have believed he was closer to God. The early Normans were a ruthless and violent breed, and the buildings of churches formed an important part of their perceived penance to God. When the manor house was first constructed, there may have been a door that led straight into the church via a passage from the manor house side. This is now long gone. However, a doorway still exists in the east wall of the churchyard that later lords used to go to church. In both cases, a private entrance meant that the lord didn't have to rub shoulders with the peasants and serfs from the village. The lord would have his own private seating in the chancel near the altar, the holiest place in the church. All the Portslade villagers paid a whopping 1/10 of their earnings or produce to support the church and clergy. This was called a tithe. You can find the tombs of some of Portslade's lords in the church graveyard. Above the basement was the Great Hall of Portslade Manor. The hall was an important part of manor life and where the business of the manor was conducted. The lord of the manor had command of everything on his land. With the help of his officials, he would ensure that peasants worked the land and paid their rent and taxes. Rent was often paid in the form of grain, other produce, livestock, and labour. The Great Hall was also used for receiving guests and was the place where most of the household would eat. The original entrance is in front of you. It is through this door that the lord and lady of the manor would have entered into the Great Hall. The manorial court was held in the hall, hearing disputes and deciding punishments for minor crimes. More serious crimes were heard by the King's Court. The right to hunt was highly prized by the nobles, and therefore the severest punishments were dealt out to poachers, often hanging or mutilation. Chimneys were rare in early Norman buildings. The hall had one large fire in the centre, which was used for heating and cooking. The smoke would escape through special openings in the roof. It must have been pretty smoky and sooty inside the hall, as well as very draughty. In Norman times, it was common for everyone, including the servants of the house, to sleep in the Great Hall, as that was the warmest room. The lord and lady of the manor would have their own sleeping chamber partitioned off. A wooden bedstead with bed curtains and canopies, feather mattresses, sheets and heavy blankets would ensure a good sleep for the lord and lady. Tapestries were hung on the walls to keep out the draught, and also add some colour to the Great Hall. The servants, however, would sleep wrapped in a blanket, with straw or wooden pallets as their mattress. Even in the summer, it would be quite cool inside the thick walls of the manor house. Feasting was an important part of medieval life. The lord of the manor and his entourage would have enjoyed the produce of his lands, including fresh meat, fish and vegetables. Bread would be made from the grain made at the lord's own mill. Swan was often served as a banquet food, and animals such as hedgehog and porcupine frequently found their way to the dinner table. People ate with their fingers and knives. Forks were not introduced until much later, and when they were, people thought they were a silly idea. The original manor building, which was built in 1130, was the rectangular-shaped walls you saw earlier on the tour. But soon this building would seem small and dated for any progressive lord of the manor. It was decided to add a west wing and tower, giving the manor the spacious L shape you see today. It is difficult to date exactly all the additions and alterations made to the manor house. Certainly the tall tower added an extra floor and more living space for the household. And a spacious basement would have been used to create a kitchen fit for preparing a lord's banquet. And 2 new fireplaces enhanced the living standard. But when was it built? Well, we will let you be the judge. Here is the evidence. It is fairly certain that this new basement was used as a kitchen. There are more details on this in the next stop. Food has always been important in noble society, but became a status symbol during the Tudor period, which was 1485 to 1603. A large kitchen was a fashion must. On the tower wall, just to the left of the vertical row of orange bricks, you can see some ornate decorative plaster. This is evidence that there was a posh room used by the members of the household. This style of plastering was popular between 1550 to 1640. If you look into the bottom corner of the tower, you can see remains of the wall plaster. This was lime-washed to help keep it clean and spread more light. The design technique dates back to Roman times. On the right side of the tall tower, you will see 2 rows of orange-red vertical bricks. These were the decorative edges to the windows. The use of these bricks was very popular in the 16th century, so is the tower from Tudor times? Now have a look at the flints and mortar. They look very similar to the flints on the original Norman manor, built in 1130. The walls of the manor are also very thick, about 92 centimetres wide, just like the original Norman building. But wait, the south wall behind you, the area by the kitchen, is only 71 centimetres wide. Also on the tall tower, about halfway up, the napped flints suddenly change into large beach pebbles. So was the west wing built in 2 or 3 different phases? And finally, a fragment of ornamental plaster frieze with the date 1611 was found halfway up the inside of the tall tower. Was this the year the west wing was built? Or merely a date when it was redecorated? Or maybe the birth of a family member? We would love to hear your ideas on this history mystery. The brickwork in front of you was once a roaring fire, where the families of the manor had their meat roasted on a spit. A typical Tudor kitchen would also have a charcoal stove used for general cooking and a separate bread oven. This kitchen would have been around 10 metres long and extending to the north wall behind you. The kitchen would store the wine, spices and food supplies. There would also be a separate area for confectionery, as puddings and sweets were a popular Tudor food. The kitchen would cook for the lord of the manor and also his staff. However, whilst the lord feasted on meat and several main dishes, the workers ate cabbage, mushrooms, onions and the occasional rasher of bacon. Washing, cleaning and laundry were important to a wealthy Tudor lord. Water for Portslade Manor was collected from the village pump, likely situated about 50 metres away in the old village. Laundry was undertaken by using a large barrel filled with water. As bleach was yet to be invented, urine was used as a whitening agent. Bathing was more of a problem, but, despite common misconceptions, wealthy Tudors washed regularly. Water would be heated in the kitchen, then poured into a specially made bathing tub. Local herbs would be added to the water, or soap made from olive oil and spices would be used. Imagine not having an indoor flushing toilet. The idea is unthinkable. But flushing toilets only became mainstream in the late 19th century. The toilet arrangements of the Norman manor house were a cesspit, a hole in the ground lined with stone or wooden planks. This was housed inside a wooden hut close to the manor house. One can only imagine the smell. When building the new West Wing, the Lord and Lady of the manor took the opportunity to include a new posh indoor toilet called a guardrobe. A guardrobe was a hole built over a stone chute on the inside of the building, which discharged human waste directly to the outside. You are now looking at the exact point of where the noble poo landed. It was the job of the servant to clear this chute regularly, possibly using it as fertiliser in the kitchen garden. The word guardrobe is French for cloakroom. It is probable that the toilet chute was situated in a small room where they also hung their cloaks. It was thought that the ammonia smell would protect coats and cloaks from fleas and moths. The guardrobe would have been foul-smelling, and the floor scattered with rushes, aromatic herbs, and flowers to deter vermin. There was no toilet paper in those days, and most people would use sticks, leaves, or moss to wipe their bottoms. A rich lord would use lamb's wool. Vegetables, herbs and fruit were grown in the manor house gardens. Herbs from the manor garden would have been used to season food and to make remedies to treat illness. Herbs grown in the garden would have included parsley, sage, rosemary, tarragon and thyme, all still popular today. There would have been beehives in the gardens too. Sugarcane was unknown in the early Middle Ages, so honey was the only way to sweeten food. The beeswax was used to make candles, the only way to light a dark manor house at night. It is important to remember that the Lord of Portslade Manor owned vast amounts of land throughout Portslade beyond the manor house. On this land he would graze his livestock, grow produce and hunt. John Borrer, Lord of the Manor until 1866, owned 700 acres in Portslade, where he grazed 1,700 sheep. The old manor house was in use until 1806. At this time, the lordship of Portslade had passed to the Borrer family, who decided to build themselves a more spacious and fashionable manor house. The Georgian house in the Emmaus grounds next to the old ruins was completed in 1807 and is in complete contrast to its predecessor. A bow front, canopied windows and stuccoed facade emphasised style over the very practical Norman design. After the new house was built, the old manor house was used as an almshouse for the poor and destitute. During the Victorian era, it was brutally demolished, leaving us with the scene we look upon today. Some of the old house flints were used to build a garden folly castle tower, a dovecote and a grotto. These can all be seen in the Emmaus grounds. No one knows why John Borrer destroyed the old manor house, though there is a theory that he didn't like the impoverished living immediately on his doorstep. John Borrer died in 1866 and is buried in St Nicholas Church. His grave is next to the doorway he had built for his own privacy, leading to Portslade Manor from the church. You can find out more about the tragic personal life of John Borrer through the on-site display boards. In 1904, the manor house and grounds were purchased by Kathleen Nelson and given to the poor servants of the Mother of God, an order of religious sisters. They left the convent in 1996 and the Emmaus community opened in February 1997. Portslade Manor is now managed and maintained by Fresh Start Portslade, a local charity run by Portslade residents. The old manor has recently undergone extensive specialist restoration, which included repairs to the stonework and windows. However, this work will always be ongoing, as weathering and age take its toll on the 900-year-old Norman manor house. Donations for its upkeep are greatly accepted. The building is Grade 2 listed, sits within a conservation area, and is also a scheduled ancient monument. This means that the local council, Fresh Start Portslade, and the UK government have a duty of care to ensure this historical treasure lasts at least another 900 years. But you can find out more about Portslade's fascinating 4,000-year history and historic buildings by visiting www.portsładehistory.co.uk. Thank you for visiting today, and we hope you enjoyed the tour. Bye!